So welcome everybody to Popular Music Books in Process. We're a collaboration between the Pop Conference, which has its call for papers out right now, IASPM, which has its call for papers out right now. So if you're not attending a conference come April or July, that's completely on you. And the Journal of Popular Music Studies, where you can take what you said at the conference and publish it. Our series continues in a couple of weeks with Gail Wall talking to Gus Stadler about a book in progress. This is Rhythm, Wald's biography of Ella Jenkins. And if you've missed prior sessions in the series, my YouTube channel has 70 plus of them, so go knock yourself out. But for today, and I gotta also thank my co-organizers in the series, Carl Wilson, Gus Stadler, Kimberly Mack, and making this extra special, Francesca Royster. Royster is also our guest for today to celebrate the publication of her book, Black Country Music, Listening for Revolutions. And she will be speaking with Rissi Palmer. So, wow. We have a lot for you. I'm going to very quickly give the bios for these folks and then pass it on to them. So Francesca Royster is professor of English at DePaul University in Chicago. Her recent special issue of the Journal of Popular Music Studies on the futures of country music, which was called Uncharted Country, won the Ruth Soley Award from the American Musicological Society. Her books include Becoming Cleopatra, The Shifting Image of an Icon, Sounding Like a No-No, Queer Sounds and Eccentric Acts in the Post-Soul Era, today's topic, Black Country Music, and amazingly, another one shooting out the pike in just months, Choosing Family, a memoir of queer motherhood and Black resistance, which is expected in February 2023 from Abrams Overlook Press. Rissi Palmer was raised in a musical family that loved both country and R&B. By the time she was 19, she'd already been offered her first publishing and label deal. In 2007, she released her debut album, which included the charting singles Country Girl, Hold On To Me, and No Air, the album Rissi Palmer. Since then, she's independently released a Christmas single, her first children's album, Best Day Ever, an EP entitled The Back Porch Sessions, and her most recent album, Revival, was released in 2019. I'm also informed that she will be touring starting in May, and if you want tickets for the May tour, they start going on sale this Friday, so that's some hot off the presses information. Beyond her musical career, which has included performances at the White House, New York's Lincoln Center, and multiple times on the Opry. She's also launched a radio show, an important one, Color Me Country with Rissi Palmer on Apple Music Country. That's been airing since August 2020. And you can watch that live every other Sunday on Apple Music Country at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. In conjunction with the radio show, she created the Color Me Country Artist Grant Fund, designed to support new country artists of color who are just beginning to build their music careers. And she's also a special correspondent for CMT's Hot 20 Countdown. So Francesca has a great, perfect person to talk with. While the conversation is going on in classic book series fashion, please post reactions and comments in the chat. Even better, if you have a question, post it when you think of it. At the end, Carl Wilson will call on you for the final aspect of the session, our Q&A. And for now, I'm turning it over to Rissi and Francesca. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the intro, Eric, and Carl for doing all of our tech here, getting us set up. And so excited to see Casey and Joel here, and Charles, and all of you. And so proud and excited to be in conversation with Rissi Palmer, who I have admired for a really long time, and who I listen to with, bated breath every time a new episode of Color Me Country comes on, just so that I can know what's going on in the country music world. She's done so much to educate me and also uplift artists, Black, Indigenous, and Latinx artists of country music. And I just think she's made such an amazing impact on the genre. So what a pleasure. What a pleasure, Rissi.
No, thank you so much. Oh God, that was so nice. Thank you. I'm honored to be speaking with you. And, you know, I brought the book out because I have dog-eared some stuff, but like this is a pretty incredible book, and a book that I didn't think would be possible in my lifetime. So I'm honored to be here speaking with you, and thank you so much for that really kind introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Rissi. Thank you. I was wondering, I was thinking I would read a little bit to get warmed up if that sounds good. Does that sound good to you? Okay.
That's
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, I wanted to read a chapter on Valerie June. And this chapter is called Valerie June Ghost Catcher. And yeah, in the chapter, I'm thinking about the ways that Valerie June as an artist is looking always at the past and digging into archives, but also like creating futures and always very like futuristic, Afrofuturistic in her music. Um, so I'll just read a few pages and then I'll stop and then we can just be in conversation and see if that sounds good. So, okay. I'm watching a video of Valerie June's 2015 appearance on An Evening at Elvis, a performance space housed in Elvis's former digs on Audubon Drive in Memphis. Valerie June begins upbeat. In Tennessee Time, she talks about her vision for making art, makes wisecracks on her own misunderstood and perpetual lateness, and introduces the audience to her banjo, mini ukulele, and guitar, which she's winsomely nicknamed the Mama, the Baby, and the Stranger, respectively. Even the lonesome Somebody to Love is punctuated by a giggle. She performs her version of Jim Reeves' Southern gospel single, This World is Not My Home, I'm Just a Passing Through, lending it her own spacey, funky, fake quirkiness, and explains that it was her favorite hymn growing up. I never felt like I was an earthling. I don't know, maybe I was from some magical fairyland that had lots of sparkling turquoise things flying around, she says. I find this confession endearing, one of the many ways I hear in this charismatic performer 20 years younger than I, an echo of my own Black, queer, nerdy self. With her feet tapping out the beat on a tambourine set on the floor, I think of tent revivals, folks sweating out sin through the sheer joy of music. But with the next song, June moves to another kind of otherworldliness. She slips a metal guitar slide attached to a floral silk handkerchief onto her pinky finger, flips her long dreadlocks over her shoulder, and still smiling says, "The thing about organic moonshine roots music is you have to play a murder ballad after a gospel song just because a little wrong keeps you right." Organic moonshine roots music is June's special take on country, blues, and gospel music, an approach shaped as much by past artists as by their own ingenuity and creativity. June laughs in the audience and I laugh along with her. Then we all go quiet, respectful. This one will be a murder ballad from the female perspective, she tells us. It's a chance for June to join a chorus of other haunted voices in a tradition dominated by men in blues and in country. Elvis Presley and Jimmy Rogers, Johnny Cash and Jimi Hendrix, Woody Guthrie and Bob Dylan, and of course, Robert Johnson. Some notable women have tried their hand at murder ballads too, including Nina Simone and Ma Rainey. June closes her eyes and calls them all forth. The temperature in the room shifts to a dank chill, and my fingers tingle as she breathes out the first line of Shotgun a cappella. "Oh, baby, you know I love you, baby. I'm in love with you. Yes, I am." It's a simple defense, the only one offered, a wail whispered as if from the grave, which it turns out to be. The chords inch along a spooky bare bones blues. Her face grim, eyes somewhere else. Her voice raspy with grief, she shares with us her plan to get her shotgun and have revenge. June conjures the motherless child loneliness of blues women Geeshie Wiley and Elvie Thomas, the hollowed out grief of Lead Belly. Next, the song breaks into a fast, furious run, and at the end of each line, her fingers ring for vibrato from the neck of the guitar she calls the Stranger, as if it were human. She skids to a stop as if she's seen her own ghost. After 3 beats, these lines come out as an exhausted sigh. "Well, late last night they laid you in your lonesome grave. And don't you know, tonight they lay me beside you. She gives the strings one more wallop, then hangs her head in silence. It's the mid 1990s, and my mom and I are walking just outside of State College, Pennsylvania, in search of the graveyard that was said to house the graves of Black slaves who ran away to freedom. It's been a year since I've moved to Penn State, my first job teaching English out of grad school. And this was my first visit from my mother, who's here from Chicago. Mom is dressed in jeans and jaunty red kid high tops, ready to explore. Her cornrows are tied back with a red bandana, all the better to be sighted by hunters, I think to myself. I've not yet told my mother of my struggles with my new job, the way that this new school and especially new town nestled deep in a verdant valley have left me lonely deep in my bones. As we walk up the ridge, eyes scanning the ground for grave markers, I venture, I just feel sad here sometimes, Mom. But her own thought seems to be somewhere else. Her struggles at work, perhaps, or on my sister, who's just moved back home with her two young children, her marriage on the rocks. This is so peaceful, she says, scanning the graveyard and the green just beyond it. I'm glad to see you settled here. It's such a relief to me, she tells me. A little later, we find the grave markers that we've been searching for. We almost miss them because the road has been built right up to the edge of them, so that there are only a few narrow inches of ground before the gravel and then asphalt. I think about those slave bodies, wonder how they feel jammed up against the road. I wonder if anyone knows that they're driving over them as they pass. I think of all the Black lives that have been crowded out, pushed back, kicked out, moved on up and out, jailed, gentrified, relocated, priced out, starved out, terrorized, erased. Every state in the United States has a history of racial cleansing of Black people, from the sunset codes of Washington and Oregon to redlining in Illinois to the downright stealing of land in Florida. Pennsylvania has its own history. It's been both a stop on the Underground Railroad and a witness to night terrors that have driven whole Black communities out. Any place with this kind of history is bound to have ghosts. Valerie June is a ghost catcher. She takes on elements of risk and tenderness in her work, honoring moments of mortality and struggle in the music she admires and giving it back to us with her own spin. Whether it's her version of Jimi Hendrix's Tender Little Wing or her own shotgun, to create something new that honors the past. June uses both an artist's and a scholar's tools to help the listener hear and feel and understand connections between experiences and cultures that we've been told in the past are separate. Her music is an exercise of freedom and will and risk. Her sartorial style, one part retro, one part hippie, her high femme beauty, her unapologetic Blackness, the way these things are put together in settings sometimes hostile to Blackness, all might be a mask of protection, but they also draw us in. She shows us a way to enter dangerous places of history and heart and how to be brave. In Valerie June's music, I see a powerful example of African diasporic music's ability to hold culture in the body and voice, making manifest, erased, or otherwise lost musical memories. In her embrace of her voice's perfect imperfections, recalling the styles of lesser-known Black female country blues artists of the past, such as Jessie Mae Hemphill and Elizabeth Cotton, among others, June also makes use of it to call up spirits, to conjure up the ancestors. The musicologists Nina Sun Eidsheim and Mandy Suzanne Wong write that, quote, to play music, especially to improvise, is in part to bring oneself under the influence of other bodies from the past. We perform memories, our own and those of others. To improvise, then, is to call on the resources of our bodies and catapult ourselves beyond the confines and capabilities of our singular bodies. Eidsheim and Wong coined the term corporeal archaeology to think about both the ways that individuals understand their bodies through music in light of these social forces, and the ways that societies in turn understand and value that music. For me, Eidsheim and Wong's analysis brings to light how performance can capture both what is social about music and what can be deeply personal. I hear in Valerie June's performances a demonstration of music's power to hold unrecorded histories that glimmer beyond us, not quite reachable through other means.
I love that. I love Valerie June. So that I love how you, one of my favorite things about, can I say this? I'm sorry, I'm talking and like you haven't started talking yet.
Oh, no, I've been talking for 10 minutes or something. So go right ahead.
Well, no, while you were reading, I had the opportunity to interview her for the show last year,
Yeah.
and we did it last August, I believe. I had her and Allison Russell on the same show because I think of them as like they are like two black woodland creatures that are like wood sprites. They're amazing. They seem otherworldly. And so I love your description of her. But one of the things that struck me when I first learned of Valerie June was her, like, the blackness markers in her appearance.
Mhm.
And I was just like, oh, that's so dope. Because I remember, like, she's got locks
Yeah.
and she's got big, glorious, beautiful, flowing locks. And, it harkens back to, gosh, things have changed, because I remember when this was edgy,
Mm.
and when we were trying to decide if this was my hair was going to be, my natural hair was going to be acceptable to the audience. And to me, Valerie June is probably, of all the people that are called country artists, she's, as far as black artists are concerned, or artists of color, she to me is one of the most country,
Yeah.
just because like her accent is so, oh, she reminds me of my family in Georgia. Like she's so country, and she's just unapologetically so, and like she can't even help herself. Like she's almost Dolly Parton-esque, like just kind of in her aura
Mhm.
and her demeanor, and you can't help but smile when you see her. And she's just, oh, she's just everything, but she's still like, she's all these things, and she is very much black,
Yeah.
and very much a black woman, and I love that about her.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that about her too. And I think the way that she expands what is considered kind of authentic and soulful
Yes.
and all these things in her style and just in her presence. I remember during the pandemic, she did this like a fundraiser. Now I can't remember, that she organized with other artists. Oh, I can't remember the name of it, but she would, have different guests on and then kind of talk in between, but just her generosity toward other musicians and also toward our audience, the warmth that she brings really struck me. And in a way, it was a different experience her perform live, because there is a way that sometimes she's more masked, like her her like humor and kind of her camping, sort of like Dolly, I guess, sort of provides a kind of distance. But in these other moments, I've seen her really kind of integrate kind of a warmth and self to this style and just sort of demand that we think of them all together. So, and I think that like I think it's a very actress aspect of her, because she is saying,
Think of it as a book of affirmations, and she actually said that when we talked, that she look at it so much as poetry as it is like affirmations and like small prayers and that sort of thing. And like she's just always very much, she's got like a foot in the past,
Mhm.
but very much like a foot in like the year 3000. kind of thing. And it's very cool. And I really like her. Like there's really nobody else like her. Like
Mhm.
she's singular in her approach and in the way that she thinks about the music and that sort of thing. And I was really, in talking with her and kind of getting to know her backstory, we almost didn't have Valerie June because she was very much content with being a background person and playing for her then partner. And he was constantly telling her that her voice didn't sound good
Mm.
and that she wasn't a good player. And she was able to, by accident, stumble into being the Valerie June that that we all know and love. And I just there's something about that I just love, that she was discounted and even discounted herself, but like
Yeah.
still couldn't help but be amazing and a star like she is, because she really is. She's a star.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. I love the sound of her voice and the ways that she's developed what sometimes has been kind of labeled the flaws of her voice or the amateurness of her voice, which I don't buy that at all. But to really see
No, it's style.
the trajectory and the style and her new covers album, I think is really fabulous for that because she's helping us like to hear these songs that have been recorded before and in this entirely powerful way, for sure.
So
And
I wanted to, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
no, I was just going to fangirl that that's so great that you got to have a conversation with her and with Allison Russell together because they're both of them are also so optimistic about human nature, and that comes out too in both of their music. Despite having these histories of struggle, their positivity.
100%. I ended up talking to them back to back. So on the same day. So like I got off and I really feel like I could float after I talked to them, because it was just like, they're both just so, I don't know. Like it's you could think, one could think standing on the outside that a lot of that is just like like you said, a mask. And then like sitting and talking to them, because I spoke to Allison for like an hour and a half, way longer than we should have. And the same with Valerie. I ended up talking to her for almost 2 hours.
Mhm.
And it's not fake at all. Like they're
Mhm.
both, I think, some people develop coping mechanisms like to be defensive or to be closed off or to be cold or whatever.
Yeah,
Both of them have somehow, their defense mechanism is optimism and like an openness.
yeah,
And it's pretty astounding considering where both of them come from. And it just was like, it was healing. I don't want to sound cliche, because it can very much sound cliche, but like I got off the phone and my producers always listen in on the interview to take notes.
mhm.
And like when both of them got off the phone, everybody turned their screen on Zoom and we all started screaming at the same time. It was really funny. Like we didn't even do it on purpose, but it was just like, oh my God, it was so good. Like it was just like, this is so good. This felt so good. And they're
Yeah,
just like, we're very lucky to be alive at the time when they're both making music in this genre and in this place, because they are really special people.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And actually, I feel that way about you as well. I feel like
Oh, stop.
always bring such genuineness to what you're doing and your ability to put people at ease and to open up spaces for them to speak and and tell the stories in your interviews. I feel like it's a real just a real gift. And yeah, I feel like you affect people in that way too. Even if stylistically you're different, I really feel like your positivity also comes out on your show. Just
Thank you. Yeah, I'm a what do I call myself? I'm a cautious optimistic.
yeah,
I
yeah.
used to be optimistic, and then I turned 40. But no, I think I don't know. I just think that I'm very lucky to have this job because I get to see, like we were talking about before everyone came on, we were talking about the Grammy nominations.
Mhm.
And since I'm on the Grammy board, I can't speak too despairing about
Okay.
it, but
Fair enough.
no, it's fine. I mean, sometimes you get good stuff, sometimes you get boring stuff. I don't know. But
Mhm.
I think that so much of what the discourse is about music right now is that there's nothing good. There's no good music, or that everything's boring, or everything is the same and it's very homogenized. And in my job, in actually seeking out music and listening to things that people send me, and people, inboxing me with stuff, I get to hear really good music, and
Mhm.
I get to hear really great people and meet really great people and have conversations with them about, why did you write this? Or like, the hell were y'all thinking about? Or whatever. And I get honest answers, and it's really nice to do it. And so I can be optimistic because I know that there is so much good stuff happening musically that doesn't always make it to the radio, or doesn't always make it to be nominated for a Grammy or whatever. But like, hold on to hope, because there's a lot of really good stuff out there. You just have to find it. And I'm really very thankful that I get to share it a lot of times. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, because I'm very excited. I am always very excited every time I get on the mic.
That's terrific. Yeah. And we all benefit from it as well. So
I just want to ask you, like, we talked a little bit about this on the show when you came on my show, but like, why did you write this? Like, what made you write this?
yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like it was sort of a coming together of different forces. Like I had talked a little bit to my dad, who um, had been a sessions musician along with an English teacher in the 1970s in Nashville. And he was telling me these stories about collaborations and unexpected connections. And I just thought, wow, I'd really love to find out more about this world, and also explore why this feels unusual to me. I mean, once I started researching, then I realized, oh, it was actually part of a particular moment and a particular movement, kind of in subcultural country, alt country, Nashville. But I was really interested too in the ways that, like in my dad's own persona as like a kind of Black and proud African studies kind of professor, that this country music life was kind of put to the side. And I don't think deliberately, but just kind of thinking about the taboos around Blackness um, and the politics of that. So I just wanted to know more about that. And then, like hearing Tina Turner and finding her country album, who I also loved, and then the explosion in Black country music, or what feels like an explosion, um, that was happening at the same time that I was starting to write, just made it impossible not to write a book about it. And thanks to Casey Kitchell and to Charles and Jessica, who like showed an interest at University of Texas Press and convinced me that there was a place for these questions, and that it was a timely work. It just made me kind of keep digging and keep asking. But I also just found music that was interesting. And, as a kind of performance studies person, I'm always interested in like performance and image and gesture and icon, but also the music itself and the storytelling of music. And so, yeah, so Black country music like demanded to be explored in all those different, almost all those different, and really kind of thinking about those erased histories that are coming to light more as well.
Yeah, you said something that struck. It was one of my favorite parts about the book, is the struggle between Blackness and being a part of this music, because of the way that country music has been marketed and soul for so long, they seem like polar opposites.
Yeah.
When, it's funny because, most of us Black folks are in the South,
Yeah.
and have been for a very long time. And so I know more country Black folks than I do anybody else. And it's like, I know everyone I know goes down South, has family down South and all these things. And so country feels just kind of inherently, the idea of being country, the idea of being Southern, in a lot of ways seems very inherently Black to me. And so it's always very funny whenever, people are like, oh, that's white people's music. Or, why would you want to be involved in that? Or why would you want to get in there? Like, I can't even tell you how many how many people, when I first started talking about doing my show, was like, oh, so this is going to be like a short mini series, what you're doing. Because they didn't believe that there were enough of us for this to be a long thing. And so I'm really very glad that you talk about that. Like, the funniest part is in the very beginning of the book, in the introduction, where you talk about the Chicago barbecue festival, and how you went up to the Black people and you were like, so who are you here to see? And they're like, I'm here for ribs.
Yeah.
So it's like, you didn't come out here for ribs.
Yeah.
That's not there are plenty of places in Chicago to go get ribs that don't include country music. You're here for the music, but that's fine.
Yeah.
It's just, it's so funny. It's so funny, the game.
It is. And it's like, I do think it's different in the North, like in Chicago, because I think that there is also kind of this attempt to, for some people, not for everybody, but to kind of claim a Northern identity that is like different and separate from the South. And so when I first started out, after talking to my dad, I just started talking to friends who told me, that they were also country music listeners, sometimes closet country music listeners. And there's constantly like this desire to say, well, I'm from the North, but back home in Belize, like, we listen to country music every morning. Or, I'm a Chicagoan through and through, but my grandmother loved to listen to Dolly Parton. Or, there are always these stories about the very near past. And I think that there's a lot of pressure now, maybe not as much since Black folks have been kind of returning to the South, but for a long time, there's a real pressure to oneself from the South and from Southern culture and Southern ways of being, even though I think like the South side of Chicago is pretty darn Southern, like I think that Chicago as a city is shaped by Southern culture for sure, especially Black Southern culture. So yeah, it's a kind of an artificial separation, but I think that, it is also coming out of, histories of pain, of having to flee, experiences of seeing your parents or grandparents also suffering, like all these things that shape the kind of North-South dichotomy, which I'm realizing now is, yeah, it's a fiction. And that that there's so much more, so many ways that we connect with each other that often aren't talked about.
I forgot I was on mute. You got a question, and it looks like a good one. Can you talk a little bit about Chicago as a site for Black Southern discourses? And I just
Yeah.
want to throw in there, St. Louis. I'm from St. Louis,
Oh yeah.
and St. Louis is one of the most soul country,
Yeah.
soul country for a Midwestern city, but Chicago is as well. Yeah. So go ahead, Francesca.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about it in terms of foodways and thinking about it in terms of speed, like just like the way that community is made, just the culture of neighborhoods that Chicago is kind of famous for is also like I think a very Southern, we could say old world approach, depending on where your world is, where your people are from. But yeah, I think that the communities within communities remind me of Southern connections. But also, yeah, like music that's made in Chicago, like homegrown Chicago music, the doo-wop groups like the Shylights, like just thinking about the way that the South is informing that music, and the blues, of course, very much connected. So I think that those are definitely parts that where we can continue to see that connection. And you're right, like people go south all the time. Like that movement, the diaspora of South and North is very fluid and flexible. You know, folks recently struck down south and decided to move to Georgia, and then then came back again. So I think that those movements are definitely there.
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt.
no.
I just wanted to say people are going to be putting questions for the Q&A in the chat as we go, but let's save them for the Q&A when we get there. So we should have mentioned that at the top, but I just wanted to intervene so you know. Okay, continue.
I'm
on.
sorry, Carl.
I totally knew that. So, but I love Stacey's
That was
question.
my fault. I'm
I just
sorry.
I can't not answer Stacey. So yeah. But yeah, so you're from St. Louis originally then, right? So
I was born in Swickley, Pennsylvania,
Mhm.
and I grew up in St. Louis.
Okay.
And and both of my parents are from Georgia.
Mhm.
And so I am Southern by proxy because of like spending time with my family, and I probably spent more time in Georgia than I have anywhere else that I lived.
Mhm.
But I remember moving to St. Louis and being really scared about what the Midwest was going to be like, and like that sort of thing. And then getting there, and I was like, this feels like Georgia.
Yeah.
And like just even the way like some of the houses are, and like it reminded me of neighborhoods when I used to drive around with my grandmother to go different places and stuff. And and the way everybody talks. I mean, you got Nelly with
Mhm.
Southern with country grammar, and he's not kidding. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, he super overplayed it, but not really. Like
Yeah.
I remember the first time someone asked me for a pencil in class, and I had no idea what they were talking about.
Because it had
They kept saying, "I want a pencil," and I was like, "What is that?" And like looking around, I was like, "I don't understand what you're saying."
yeah.
But it's just you take these cultures with you from
Mhm.
wherever you go. A lot of the people that I went to high school with, for example, a lot of the Black people that I went to high school with their families came from Mississippi
Mhm.
and had been in St. Louis for 20, 30 years at that point, but didn't let go of the culture and the cultural things. And for us, I can speak for my family and for those close to me, that those traditions that our grandparents and our great grandparents and that sort of thing, like those are things that are still, I'm still trying to teach to my girls
Mhm.
and to my family and instill in that. So like that Southern culture, Black culture, the culture that we cultivated in being brought here, and a little bit of Africa, a little bit of the South mixed together is, makes up a lot of what is Black American culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I love your country girl song because I feel like that's what you're really naming that, and naming the ways that not only does countryness travel and is based in lots of different communities, but that we can also we can claim it. And it made me think about like when I was finishing the book, I did a little hand wringing about it, like oh, I'm from Chicago and here I am, and this music is very much Southern based, and just kind of anticipating, a kind of I don't know, just a little defensive, like, okay, who am I? But then really,
Right.
also as someone who's lived in the South and who cares, and but also who thinks and kind of listens to music with an ear that's informed by a history that's also Southern. So I had to think it through for myself as well. And I'm still myself.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, that's why I wrote the song, because I knew that, I mean, I had already gotten it from people saying to me, you know, why are you singing country from St. Louis? Why are you singing country music? And why do you love it so much? And that sort of thing. And it's funny to me, country music and rap are the only two places where people question where you come from. And, you know, if you're not from the designated places, you know, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
And, you know, for me, it was like I said, I at the time when I wrote the song, I was so young. I wasn't really grappling with some of these social issues, philosophical issues, with country music, but I really was, and I just didn't know what it was called. And so, you know, I was talking about what we just talked about, like that so much of the culture that I was involved in was country. And I understood just as well as anyone else. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there needed to be a horse in my backyard
Right.
for me to talk about it or for me to understand it. So yes, I'm sorry, everybody, if you hear a little voice, that's my 3-year-old trying to talk to me on a walkie-talkie right now. So sorry.
It's okay. It's totally okay.
Okay, give me 1 second, bud. So another thing that I loved about your book was you talked, and we talked about this on the show, but it was one of my favorite points that you hit on was joy and black specifically black male joy, and then also, you know, this line that we straddled in a lot of ways. I gotta wash my hands. Okay, go wash your hands, bud. The line that we straddle as far as like, is this minstrelsy, all this dancing and happy, you know, happy Negro trope, or is this, you know, is this a form of activism in some way?
Yeah.
And because a lot of the comment section that I see anytime a Black publication posts anything about Black country artists is, oh, it's a bunch of people that want to be white, or that, you know, this isn't Black music. Why are y'all talking about this stuff? And look at them. They, you know, they don't care about what's going on or anything like that. And I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry. I'm trying to get the 11-year-old to help with the 3-year-old. Okay.
This is very
But
relatable.
I am so sorry. Like
No,
they are just kind of doing their own thing, and I apologize. No, but no one wants to talk to mommy until she's on Zoom, and then everyone wants to talk to mommy, and like everything's on fire. So anyway, it's something that I hadn't really thought of. It's something that I always get very defensive about because I've had it said about me. Yeah. And there have been times that I have thought about it about certain artists. And like one of the things that comes to mind is, it's not in me. Okay. You can go ahead and go in there. No, Gigi won't get She's using, go ahead. You can go in there now. But like I thought about it with Darius Rucker. When Darius Rucker came on my show, he'd never talked about race before. And everybody, whenever you think about Darius Rucker, you think about Happy, you think about Wagon Wheel, and you think about like, you know, Happy, Hootie and the Blowfish, singing Darius Rucker. And to hear him talk about some of these things that he'd been grappling with was really interesting to me. And so, you know, country music and happiness, and specifically Black male joy as a form of resistance, is a really interesting, it's an interesting thought. And like, I guess Was it something that you had been thinking? Okay. Was it something that you had been thinking, or was it something that came up in your research?
Well, I am always thinking about like the connection between joy and struggle, and the ways that those things are so deeply connected, probably for all of us, but also in like black art, black music. So that's part of it. But absolutely also, I'm sorry, my thing just dinged. But I thought about it also, when I was studying the banjo and kind of reading Dina Epstein's history of the use of the banjo, being used on slave ships to exercise enslaved people, but also, how the music became this source of solace, and had been a source of solace, and the ways that like in the roots of this music are like the coming together of sorrow and resilience and connection. And so I was thinking about that, but also, yeah, really thinking about the ways that like for someone like Rucker or other artists who, I'm so sorry to figure out how to turn this off, how artists who are very public facing like Rucker, um, in some ways are readable as kind of only happy in a way because audiences project that onto them. They see them as safe. And I think it's important. I thought it was so important in your interview with Rucker to think about, I don't know how to turn this off, to think about the depth of his music. And even if he chooses, oh my Lord, the way, even if he chooses um, to protect his own privacy, um, wow, the ways that like the combination of joy and struggle are kind of connected in the music itself. So, but he was really, I thought he was a really interesting artist to explore because to me, he really kind of showed me the very narrow path for Black men to be successful in mainstream country music, and the
Yeah,
strategy,
yeah.
geniality, and diplomacy that he shows, as well as, kind of thinking about Charlie Pride in the past. Like I think that their joy, there's a kind of performative joy about them, but there's also um, another kind of depth to their music that is kind of in the sound. So yeah.
100%. I mean, shoot, we talk about this, my producers and I actually talk about this behind the scenes because, I'm not a he who shall not be named. When the whole incident happened last year with the N word heard around the world,
Yeah.
and everybody, was rushing to either condemn or to say nothing or to defend. It was frustrating that a lot of times it was only Black women in country music saying things. And so a lot of times we were the brunt of a lot of the online vitriol and hate and that sort of thing. And it was frustrating because it was just like, well, where are y'all at? Then, we were having a conversation because 2/3 of my production company are Black. I have a Black female producer and I have a Black male producer. And we talk about this during our production meeting. And it's like, to be a Black man in America is to constantly have to justify your existence, and to placate and make everyone feel comfortable
Yeah.
with your existence.
Yeah.
And in a country music setting, which is already a very conservative setting, and is already a very, I love Jesus and my mama and my country and my truck and my gun and like all these things, you can't necessarily, like, Darius can't say some of the things that like Toby Keith says,
Right.
or some of the things that Jason Aldean says. And, Jimmy Allen, same thing. He can't necessarily come out and say and do just because of the vessel in which he lives.
Yeah.
And so it's, because in a lot of ways it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Like, it was very dangerous for Charlie Pride.
Yeah.
And, it's not as dangerous, but
Mhm.
it's dangerous. And so for the gentlemen that are here now. And so when I get frustrated when things happen and then they don't speak out, or they're kind of being contrary to what
Mhm.
we're saying,
Mhm.
and what a lot of us know to be true in the background, and what a lot of us talk about in the background privately,
Yeah.
I have to remember that even though I am Black, my vessel is different, and the way that people receive me is very different than the way that they are received. And so it doesn't excuse sometimes the feeling, but I understand it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to see you discuss it, put it in terms that I didn't necessarily think of.
Mm.
Like, I didn't think of that as a form of resistance, but I mean, that was what we entitled the episode with Valerie and Allison, was Joy is Resistance,
Yeah.
was the name of the episode. And it truly is. Black joy in a lot of ways is resistance. And so being a country artist in a lot of ways is resistance. It is,
Yeah.
a fist in the air in some ways.
Absolutely. I think so too. I think so too. And I think that's why I really admire the work of Lil Nas X too. Like, I know that his country entrance into country was kind of fleeting, and hopefully he'll return and do some more songs besides Jolene, of course, and Old Town Road. But just his cheekiness, his unwillingness to walk the line, and to really kind of claim control over his own product, I think was so connected to the history of the narrow path of Charlie Pride or to Rucker. And like, I was just thinking about like something I read where Cowboy Troy, who's also like comic and very positive and kind of campy in his persona, but he's also talked about like feeling unsafe, on the stage, that it's like dangerous for careers, but it's also dangerous in terms of your physical body and your mortality. So um, yeah, I really hear that in them. And I do think that joy and pleasure and some sort of creative self-determination, like those are very hard to come by for any artist, but especially I think for Black artists.
Yeah, I just I really appreciate um the care in which you wrote this book, and like in telling everyone's story. And I like your story interwoven in all of these. It's very interesting, like the red Reeboks in the Valerie June, that my mother had a pair of red Reeboks
She
when I
did.
was a little girl. Yeah, in the 80s.
Mhm.
Yes, that's awesome. Okay, take your shirt off. Okay.
I need flowers on.
Okay. Yeah, I think, it's so much, it's so many of our stories. And so I
Don't
think,
put the flower dress.
okay, there's so many of our stories that connect with country music personally, or just in these moments. And like we have a long running joke on the show that like Lionel Richie is the gateway drug to
Yeah.
country music for a lot of Black people.
Yeah.
And also Randy Travis, Forever and Ever, Amen. If
Yeah.
you walk into a crowd of Black people and you say, I'm going to love you forever, they will all say forever and ever, amen. I have done it and it works.
It works.
So it's it's a really timely book. What is the response been?
Is that my nap time?
No, you're not. You're done with nap.
Oh.
Yeah, unfortunately. What has been the response to the book that you've received so far?
It's been really positive. I've had I've had a chance to have conversations with lots of different audiences just in the past month. And one of my favorite conversations was with Theo Books in Durham. Where you are in Durham, yeah. And
I was so mad I couldn't go that night.
I'm so sorry about that. Yeah, I should have just like made sure I should have made sure the date matched. But it was an amazing conversation. It was almost all Black women, and I just had this just a beautiful conversation with Charlotte Emons, and I feel like she was able to bring out things or get me to think about things in my own project that I hadn't thought of before, like the possibility of, the whole Lemonade album as a country music album, as opposed to just Daddy Lessons, or really like thinking about just the presence of country sound as Black Southern sound in all these different genres of music. So I thought that was a really, really great opportunity to chat. And, I really have appreciated, having the chance to talk to academics and talk to music people and artists, and also to talk to just people who like to buy books and like to read books at the different book fests. So it's been really nice. And I've been so lucky to, be in conversation with great people who I've always I wrote the book in order to like talk to you, or to talk to Regina Bradley, or some of the people who I admire, who I would just, I just think, wow, spending an hour talking to them would be great. Maybe I'll write this book and then I can talk to them.
After finishing the book and like watching how this is like, because it's an ever-changing landscape over here. And the CMAs very much, to me, felt like a return to normal. I put that in quotes. Like, we went from like, Mickey being one of the hosts and for the ACMs, and having all these different people perform like on the show, to there being maybe like, I think 2 Black performers this time. And one was the Warren Treaty, and Jimmy was supposed to perform, but he ended up being sick. But and there being 1 nomination for everyone out of all the nominations for a person of color. And so like, after doing all this research and talking to all these people and writing this book, like, what is I'm curious. I know what I see, but I'm curious how you see this ending, or this not ending, but going.
Yeah. Well, what I hope is that it's just marking a conversation that's happening in lots of different places, as to put, and kind of opening up new paths and new connections. So, like maybe like it could be a gateway drug, like Lionel Richie and the Commodore Zoom or something. No, I could only wish, but but just the chance to bring together people who might not have seen themselves as like-minded, and especially in terms of thinking that trajectory or the pathway of what Black music is, and opening that up. And but in terms of the future of country music, I would not dare to guess. I feel like there's such a in the industry, which you would know this more than me, that there's such a like a conservative impulse that is really good at containing change and redirecting itself. So I feel like the change that can happen has to happen in other places, and to kind of push the industry, from these multiple directions, through fandom or through artists themselves, telling different kinds of stories.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just my personal hope is that there are, regardless of what the industry at large decides to do, that there's so many of us, and the internet is now, is can be, it can be awful, but as an independent artist, it can be really amazing. And I'm hoping that we can cultivate um, the Black audience that has always been rumored to be there,
Yes.
and that we know exists, but has never really been courted in like a very real way.
Yeah.
And figure out a way to build that base,
Mm-hmm.
because we have this conversation often, is that a lot that the luxury that a lot of Black country artists don't have, that Black artists in pop or in hip hop that want to cross over
Mm-hmm.
to being quote unquote just pop artists, is that everyone starts, most people when they start are R&B artists. So you have a base already. You have a Black audience as a base, because that's who most of the R&B music listeners are.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you go pop, like for example, Beyonce started in Destiny's Child, even though it was a pop band, like made popular music, they started on Black radio. They started doing Black events and touring with Black artists. And then once they reached critical mass, once they were on TRL
Mm-hmm.
and all this stuff, then they were able to cross over. But they will always have that base.
Yeah.
And a lot of us don't start that way, because you're going straight to the country radio audience, which is mostly white.
Mm-hmm.
And so you almost have to go backwards in trying to get a Black audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a really interesting thing. I think about it a lot in terms of marketing and that sort of thing. And so I'm hoping that like a Black audience, an actual Black audience, can be cultivated in some way.
Yeah, I hope
from all
so too.
this.
I'm often disappointed, like when I loved going to the Black Opry when it was here Black Opry Review when it was in the Chicago area in Evanston. And it might have been that it was playing at a venue that already didn't have a big Black audience, but I was really disappointed that there weren't more Black folk in the audience. But on the other hand, my daughter Cece and my partner and I got to really like court the artists on stage, and we rushed them in the back and we talked to them, and Cece drew a little picture of them, and we kind of got to get to know them. But it did remind me that the audience is still there to build. And I really admire the work of Holly G in creating more pathways for country music artists, and your work with the Color Me Country Fund and supporting the artwork of different artists. And yeah, maybe there's a role for like other kinds of discourse, like books and blogs and other things, to kind of build those connections and invite people in. And hopefully that will also create change and create a more welcoming environment.
Here's hoping.
Here's hoping.
That seems like a good note maybe to transition into the Q&A on. Thank you both so much for that conversation. I actually just, as questions are just starting to pile up in the chat, I'd like, Francesca, for you to start it off. I feel like part of the conversation that we're having really intensely in recent years is about Black artists and country music. But I think another side of what's in the book is about country in Black music. You have the chapter about Tina, and you have the chapter about Beyonce. And I'd love to hear you talk about that side of the book a little bit to start us off.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carl. Yeah, I think that that's really so important. And it's really where the kind of current history and kind of this new tradition that feels like, perhaps if you weren't paying attention, it feels like a new outburst of music. But I think that that's a really important part of it, like thinking about artists like Tina Turner or thinking about Al Green, because I feel like those artists are really, like in the book, I talk about Tina Turner kind of claiming her country roots and how important that sound, her country sound, and also country storytelling was as kind of a catapult to her kind of independent career and solo career later on. But I feel like that the fabric of really country soul and other kinds of Black music, like thinking about Black gospel, thinking about country blues, like all of that music is so important for adding depth to this current moment and really thinking about the ways that what's kind of thought about as crossover is actually more reclaiming something that's always been there, reclaiming the roots of the genre, really. Um, I love Charles's book for that too, and the ways that it's really questioning the newness or questioning the ways that what we've been allowed to see in terms of Black participation in mainstream country music recording and how very controlled and profit driven that's been. But yeah, so that's part of what I was thinking about with Tina as well. That um, you know, that she's always, as an artist, has always been so bold in claiming absolute, claiming hard-won artistic freedom to make the kind of music that she wants and to make a rock music and to bring together disco and country and all those things. So her country album, I think, is like part of a larger, powerful way that she's thinking about genre in a really elastic way.
Thanks. We have Josh Glenn, I think is the first question in the chat. You there, Josh?
Yeah, why do you always call me first, Carla? My question is not the best one, but here we go. Thank you so much, guys. That was a really, really, really insightful and brilliant and fascinating conversation. I really appreciate it. One of the best ones I've seen here on the series ever. So it was really cool. I read Francesca talking briefly in an essay about Linda Martell about the yodel, which she describes as a sonic form with roots in Africa before it was hillbilly. And I would just love to hear more about that. I had never heard that before. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks, Josh. You're the person who read that Linda Martell piece. Okay. Yeah, actually, I just found that out and I'm trying to remember I was reading a history of yodeling and it talked about the yodel as like connected to animal calls and connected to agrarian kinds of ways of being that are both of kind of the way past of African life, but also kind of thinking about more contemporarily groups in like Gambia and I think they also mentioned Senegal, where there's certain kinds of forms of sonic play where yodeling is used as a kind of call and response, like the techniques of yodeling. And so the history, which I will get you the person eventually, but the history is really looking at like the kind of more ancient traditions of yodeling and also more contemporary African traditions of yodeling, but then also thinking about yodels in the blues as well. And, how, I don't think I mentioned this in the Linda Martell piece, but how Jimmy Rogers, who, made yodeling kind of his trademark sound, was also hearing that from the African-American railroad workers and folks who were singing and working around him. So that he didn't put his spin on it and make it a beautiful thing as well, but just that it has, it's beyond the Ricola commercial, which is kind of where I always thought yodeling came from, but really thinking about these older sonic forms. And I thought the call and response part of it was just interesting because it really is a more a different way of thinking about the yodel as less than like an individualistic outburst of virtuosity and more in terms of like something that is connecting to someone else and conjuring or beckoning to that person to yodel back, which I think is pretty cool. Thank you.
Carl Miller, you said that some of your question had already been addressed, but maybe you can focus in on parts that weren't addressed and frame it that way, if you want to unmute and ask, Carl.
Thanks, Carl. Hey, y'all. Great conversation. Francesca, congratulations on the book. I'm super excited about it. And I was typing this like right, and I hit send, and then you guys started talking about the industry. And so my question was like, what are your thoughts in putting a book together like this on the different artists that you look at and their relationship to the different elements of the industry? And you answered some of this, but, you know, I kind of mentioned in my question, you know, live shows, festivals, country radio, the Americana as a landing place for a more expansive concept of roots music. And I'd just be curious to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can definitely say more, but I feel like in the book I was really in order to get a picture of like country music as a history and as a present, but also in terms of its potentials, I kind of wanted to look at the industry and other people who might not always be on the radar of the industry, because I do feel like those artists are pushing things and expanding. So I was thinking about Cameron Thomas's Country Soul Songbook and Songbook Summit as this really great space for wonderful artists like Rissi, and then also lesser known artists to sing together, and the summit, bringing together journalists and musicians and other people who are interested. So yeah, I feel like definitely the venue of the book is really might be guilty of decentering the country music industry, because maybe in somewhat of a purposeful way, in order to get a different picture, because I feel like the industry has been so successful in sidelining Black artistry and only thinking of it as an adjacent cultural form. At the same time, I think that there's so much to say about what's happening in the industry as well. So maybe I'll have to write volume 2 to get at everything that's going on. But I respect Marissa Moss's book, Her Country, because she's coming at it as someone who's, a country music journalist whose beat is the industry. And, and the stories that she's telling are different in some ways, but definitely have echoes to some of the things that I was also writing about.
Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate you decentering the music industry in the book. And I also appreciate your focus on the future of country music rather than on in addition to on the past, because that's just such a great transition. I think it's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. Antonio Randolph, if you're still here, could you unmute and jump in?
Hey, y'all, thanks for a great conversation. I had a question about, I was thinking as you're talking about country music spreading to Black fans, about if they're contemporary Black musicians who cite country music as an influence. And I was thinking about the clip of Big Boy talking about how much he loved Kate Bush, which I wouldn't have put money on that being true. But so are there other kind of Black music artists who say country was something that they were into?
I think that. Well, certainly Beyonce, I think, has claimed that for sure. Let me think about that. I don't know, Rissi, do you have a good answer for that one?
I'm trying to think of specific artists, because there are, like, I've had, when I meet people, they'll tell me, oh, I loved Shania Twain, or I love, like, a lot of people that are of my generation will always cite the Faith Hill and Shania Twain. Lord, of all the times when you should name drop, and I can't think of any names right this second, but no, it's a conversation that happens often in the background. Like I remember, Lord, I'm at a loss right now.
No,
Antonia, you put us on the spot.
Antonia,
No.
really good questions.
Kelly Clarkson, she absolutely should be. I think Kelly is indicative of a lot of artists born at the time that I was born and everybody after. In that we all grew up with radio stations that played everything. Like there was a period of time when all this stuff kind of got segregated again. Like my grandmother, my great grandmother, and my grandmother, everything was played on the radio. And then there was a time after that where everything got segregated. And then again in the 90s, in the late 90s, early 2000s, you started having these pop crossover country artists. And so then everything was played on the same radio station again. You could hear Shania Twain, Britney Spears, NSYNC, and Faith Hill, and all these things, and nobody batted an eyelash. It wasn't a big deal. And so a lot of us that grew up at that time think of all of it. Like, you know, almost all the new artists that I have as a part of the class of for Color Me Country, they all say that. I love Beyonce and I love Shania Twain. I love Casey Musgraves, and just as much as I love, you know, SZA. So it's not so taboo to be one of those artists that, you know, I listen to Little Country and then I listen to this other stuff too. So
maybe that will change even more.
well, I see the lines blurring. I mean, you can tell by a lot of the music that's coming out. Like some of my favorite crossover stuff that's happening right now is coming from Willie Jones. And Willie Jones is a hip hop artist who is faux show country. He's from Louisiana. And to me, he put out one of the best social justice activism songs of 2020 that didn't get the same kind of attention that like Black Like Me from Mickey Guyton got. And it was a song called American Dreams. It's one of the best songs. And he sings and he raps on this record. And it's phenomenal. And so like there's a lot of cool things like that happening. And he actually has an Apple Music show that's amazing too. It's called Crossroads. And it's where hip hop and country kind of meet. And that's what he does on his show every week. So check that out.
Thank you.
That's awesome. I think last up we have Dan DePiro.
Hey, thanks so much. I'm excited to dig in, but I haven't done it yet. So I think partially for that reason, I was just really struck by your invocation of improvisation earlier, and the question of sort of like ghosts even. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, or if there's like a particular artist or just in the genre writ large where how you see that mattering to what you've been talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, really, I think that ghosts and hauntings are important to just about all the artists that I'm looking at, because almost everyone is like in some ways connecting to a past artist, like thinking about Rissi and Linda Martell. I don't know if we could exactly think about that as a haunting, but you know, like thinking about being haunted by violence, or thinking about the hauntings of just the kind of sonic echoes that are part of country music that's also grounded in Black music, but then that, you know, those connections have been severed. So as I was thinking about the motif, I was really of ghosts and haunting, I was thinking about Valerie June in particular, because she was so outspoken about like going to the Smithsonian and sitting down at the archives and listening to these lesser known artists, like some who, you know, albums who are now out of print, and kind of bringing them into her voice. Um, but I think that way of kind of stirring up the past and kind of tapping into it, and worrying it is also kind of a part of a lot of the music, like definitely Our Native Daughters and Rhiannon Giddens' work, or even like Delilah Black, and who I write about in the last chapter, who's really thinking a lot about um, Black precarity and kind of lost lives in her music. Might be another way of thinking about the ghosts. So I think there's more there to be said about that. Thank you for that.
Rhiannon comes to mind as well. I mean,
Yeah.
like she almost is made like a subgenre in itself of a lot of the music that she does, where it harkens back to actual ghosts, like
Yeah.
actual people of the past and stories of the past. It's pretty, like Julie comes to mind,
Yeah.
and how haunting that song is, and then that sort of thing. So while you were talking, that's what I was thinking about, was Rhiannon
Yeah.
as well.
Sure. Yeah, and even her violin is a kind of, I mean, what am I saying? Not her violin, her banjo is a kind of close to banjo, like the sound of it, is, trying to capture that sound of lost lives, but also, yeah, the stories that she tells that are based on slave narratives and other stories that have been lost to us are so powerful. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much, Francesca and Rissi. This has been a great conversation. I think everyone will join in thanking you with me. And I just want to remind everybody that we're back on November 29th with Gail Wald, talking about her new book about Ella Jenkins with Gus Stadler. And so come and join us then. And thank you and good night.